Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We are very excited to be joined by Daniel Ferguson, Certified Flare Trainer, Consultant, and Speaker at our upcoming MadWorld conference here in San Diego this April. Today, Daniel's going to share some of his favorite practical tips and tricks in Flare in an effort to help you all work more efficiently. Before we begin, we have a lot to cover today, but just a few housekeeping items. Just so everybody knows, we will be recording the session, so all attendees will receive a link to review it later on. In the GoToWebinar panel, there is a questions area, and we do encourage you to use that if you have any questions at all. But Daniel has a lot of information to get through today, and we'll do our best to answer what we can at the end, but whatever we don't get to, we'll certainly follow up with answers and send them on after the webinar. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate it. And good morning or afternoon or evening to you all, wherever you may be in the world. I'm very, very excited to be here with you today and to be able to talk through some tips that will make your life easier working in Flare. That is today's goal, to give you something that's going to make your life a little bit easier as a Flare author. So just a little bit of an introduction. I've been in the tech-com industry for about 15, 16 years. I've worked in big companies, medium companies, small companies, all sorts of different environments. And I've been using Flare for about 3.5 years now. And for that entire time, almost that entire time, I've been running my own tech-com consulting company. And a big part of our business is Flare consulting and training. And in that role, you know, I get to see dozens of Flare projects. I get to work with all kinds of Flare users. I get to see the challenges they're facing, the solutions they come up with to meet those challenges, and it's really, really fun. And over the years that I've been doing this, I've collected a bunch of just sort of hints and tips and little nuggets of things that have helped me work more efficiently in Flare, things that I've seen other people do, or maybe I've been sharing my screen with somebody and they see me do something, they go, whoa, how did you just do that? These types of things. And when MadCap approached me to give this webinar, typically webinars, the ones I've done in the past, are like a deep dive into, you know, a specific topic. And you come away from that webinar with a better understanding of whatever it is, say page layouts or master pages or who knows what, or CSS. This demonstration's a little bit different nature because we're going to cover a broad range of topics, and no single topic that I'm going to cover today would even come close to justifying a full-blown webinar. But putting them all together, I think it's going to be, you know, really handy. And my goal is for all of you to walk away today with something, some nugget or a handful of things that you can take and apply in your day-to-day work as you work in Flare that will help you work a little bit more efficiently or understand how something works behind the scenes maybe, or that sort of thing. So again, really excited to be here today. I'm thankful to MadCap for the opportunity. So let's dive in. We're not going to go through slides today. It's almost all demonstration. But just as a very high level, I've broken up the hints and tips that I'm going to share into these 4 general areas. We're going to start by looking at some things in TOCs. Then we're going to look at some hints and tips for working in topics. And then we're going to touch on style sheets. The Flare interface stuff actually is going to kind of be peppered throughout. I don't think we're going to do like a Flare interface section necessarily. So I'll be talking about adjustments and things that you can do in the Flare interface to make it a little bit more quick to use, and some friendly things that are in the Flare interface. So that's how things are going to be chunked up today, and that is the end of the PowerPoint. So for the rest of the time, we are going to be actually working and demoing in Flare. So I've got a TOC open here. This is just one of the MadCap templates, that project template. I just created, I think, a top nav advanced is what this is. So that's what we work on. I've made some tweaks in it for demonstration purposes. So it's a pretty short TOC, not huge. I'll expand it. You'll see it's, what, maybe 18, 20 topics or something like that. Um, about, I don't know, a number of months ago, I was working with a new client, and I was showing my screen just like this, and we were looking at the TOC, and I came in, and I double-clicked a TOC entry, like I just did, and the topic opened. And I'd done that a million times before and didn't even think twice about it. And she said to me, whoa, 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 wait a minute. How did you just open that topic? I said, well, I just double-clicked the TOC entry and the topic opened. She said, well, when I double-click TOC entries, the properties dialog opens. How did you get the topic to open? I said, oh, that's right. There's this little button over on the local toolbar, way over here on the right, that toggles the double-click behavior when you double-click a TOC entry, and you have yours on. When it's on, when you double-click it, it opens up the properties dialog for this TOC entry, or when you click it again, then when you double-click a TOC entry, it's going to open up the topic. She said, I've been working in Flare for 2 years, and I had no idea that was there. That's going to save me so much time. Well, I'm good. I'm glad you know it's there now. That's one little handy trick that I have found that a lot of Flare users don't know about. Now, sometimes you want, the topic to open when you double-click a TOC entry. Sometimes you want the properties to open if you're going through and setting page breaks and chapter breaks and so forth. And so you'll flip back and forth. But just knowing that it's there and that you can use it and that you can toggle that behavior when you're working in the TOC can be very valuable and can save yourself quite a bit of time. So I hope that first little tip is helpful. We're going to keep going through some TOC tips here for the time being. Another thing that I have found myself using quite a bit in recent months that a lot of people that I work with don't know exists is the grid view of your TOC. So right up here in your local toolbar, there's a view button. And if you click this, it switches your TOC from the list view to the grid view, or from the tree view. Most people work in the tree view. I work primarily in the tree view too, because I like to see how my topics are organized and nested and so forth. It's really important to know how it's all organized. But this list doesn't actually show me very much information about the details behind these TOC entries. The grid view does. So I open up the grid view and I see all kinds of stuff, all kinds of great information about these TOC entries. And sometimes I do need to come into here and I want to see what's going on behind the fact with my TOC, behind the scenes with my TOC entries here. Now in this particular case where I only have, looks like 16 entries, I don't see a whole lot, right? But if I had several dozen or several hundred or several thousand maybe entries in this TOC, opening up a list like this to be able to see a consolidated view of some of the settings on my TOC entries can be really, really valuable. As we look through this, you'll see, I see what topic these TOC entries linked to. If I had any conditions set, I would see those in here. I see if I have a break type set and which topics are breaking. If I have a different, page layout, I see the page layout that's being used for a topic, the page type, and on and on and on, section numbers, chapter numbers, how the page numbering is handled for print output for that particular TOC entry. All kinds of great information that you can get from looking at this grid view. Now you can sort the grid by clicking like these column headings. You can click any column heading and sort this grid. If you get it all out of order, then you can click the order heading and put it back in order so that it shows in the order that you actually have your TOC built. And so you can sort this, this grid in ways that show you the information that you want to see in a consolidated fashion. If you want to even go the next level, you can export this grid to Excel by clicking this export the data to a CSV file, and it'll take your entire grid and export it all into an Excel spreadsheet so that you can use Excel functions to sort and look through the data. Again, with only 16 topics, there's maybe not a whole lot of value in there, but if I had 160 or 260 or 500, then I can really gather some useful information from using this grid view. You can customize the grid view or the columns that you see by clicking this Show Hide Columns button. It shows all of the columns that are available. By default, they're all on. You can turn them off by unchecking them. You can set their width, their color, their background color if you want them to stand out a little more or something. So you can customize this grid view pretty granularly. And you can also move the order of the columns and the order in which they appear. Now, very closely related to this grid view is something called the file list. You can get to the file list by clicking View File List. Now, the difference between the grid view and the file list is, while the grid view shows me what's in my TOC entries, the file list actually shows me all of the files that are in my project. And I see it again here in a grid view with a bunch of data, a bunch of other cells and columns over here. I have this filtered to just topics right now, but I can turn the filter off and I can see everything. I see my topics, images, more images, I see style sheets, I see master pages, everything, PDF files, everything that is in this project I see here in this list view. And just like with the grid view, I can export this to an Excel spreadsheet if I need to. One of the things I come to the list view for quite often is if I need to change the properties on some topics in bulk. So I can multi-select on this list and come down to the properties, and I could, maybe I need to give these topics a different style sheet, or maybe a different topic style class or something like that, or condition or file tags or whatever it is. I can come in and I can change all the properties for the in bulk rather than going through one by one and changing them individually. So I find those two lists to be quite handy, the file list and the grid view for your files and for your TOC entries. I'm going to switch back to the tree view here. One of the things that I've noticed a lot of people kind of spend a lot of time on or struggle with a little bit is finding a TOC entry, finding the link to the TOC entry in your Content Explorer and vice versa. It's like, okay, I have this list TOC entry. Where's the topic in the Content Explorer? Or I have this Getting Started file in the Content Explorer. Where's that at in the TOC? Again, in this example, since it's so limited, it's not that big of a deal. But imagine if this TOC was 10 times longer than it is. And if we had 10 times more files in here than we do. Getting back and forth and finding where one is, where the Content Explorer entry is or where the TOC entry is can take time. Now you can hover over this and you can say, oh, it's in, see that little hover box, content, links and lists, list, and in this small project I could go find it pretty quick. But there's an automated way to do this, and that is using these two buttons. They're in the project ribbon. One is called Locate in TOC, and one is called Locate in Explorer. These two options are also available if you right-click on a TOC entry. There's Locate in Explorer, and if I click it, it takes me right to where the topic is in the Content Explorer. Likewise, I could right-click an entry in the Content Explorer and select Locate in TOC, and it's going to take me right to where that entry is in the TOC. If this topic were to have been in more than one TOC, it would have come up with a list of TOCs that this topic is in, and I could select which TOC it is. This is a really, really quick way to get back and forth between what's in your Content Explorer and what's in your TOC and vice versa. And I've noticed that, when I teach people that this is available, there's kind of an aha moment for a lot of people. Now, I use these options so frequently that I have actually added them to my quick access toolbar. And I'll show you how to do that real quick. So your quick access toolbar by default is up here at the very top, this brown bar on my screen. Pretty much anything that is in any Flare ribbon, you can add to the quick access toolbar, and it's going to remove a click. So what you do is I'm going to add these two to my Quick Access Toolbar right now. I'm going to right-click Locate in TOC and select Add to Quick Access Toolbar. And you see it just added the Locate in TOC icon right up here. I'm going to do the same thing with Locate in Explorer, and I just added it right there. So now these two options are right available to me all the time. I don't have to click into the project ribbon and then come over here to these buttons to use them. I have them available right up here. Now you might be asking, but you just showed me they're available from these context menus. Yeah, they are, and look, there's even a shortcut key for it. But there are some cases, one case in particular that I can think of, where I need to locate something in the Content Explorer and I'm not in the TOC, and I'll show you what that case is. Before I do though, I want to demonstrate that you can move this Quick Access Toolbar to below the ribbon, which is where I like to have it. So it's now down here just a little bit closer to where I typically work. So one case where I use the Locate in Explorer very frequently is when I'm doing find and replace in files and I'm looking for something in the source code. So I've got an example set up here where I'm just going to look for a span tag. So I'm going to, I've typed in span, I'm looking for it in the source code, and I'm going to find the next topic. And it comes up with this one, what's new.htm. Now because I was looking in the source code, the result that it returned to me is the source code view of the file. And a lot of times when you're working with files, of course, you have the XML editor view and the text editor view, but in this case, I don't have that. It's not there. So what I like to do, in this case, maybe I'm okay working in the text editor view, maybe I'm not. A lot of times I like to get back to the XML editor view. And so with this file open, I can click Locate in Explorer. It takes me right to where that file is, and I can click it, and all of a sudden I have the file in my XML editor, and I can work with it here and edit it here. So I use that Locate in Explorer button very, very frequently. And so now you know that those two options are there. Hopefully that's going to help you find stuff between your TOC or your topic and where it is in your Content Explorer, especially if you have a ton of content in there, like a lot of people do. And you also know now that you have this Quick Access Toolbar available to you, and you can put frequently clicked buttons from the ribbon into your Quick Access Toolbar and hopefully save yourself a little bit of time. Now, one more thing I want to cover on the TOC. A few weeks ago, a client came to me and said, we're developing an employee portal in Flare. This is where everybody's going to go to find policies and procedures, to find company manuals, documents, time off policies, and all that sort of stuff. They said, but one of the things we want in one of our drop-down menus are links that go to other websites, like, for example, to our webmail service and to our discussion forum and to our voicemail login and these types of things. So I said, okay, let me look and see how we can do that. And what I discovered is that you can link TOC entries to external websites. The reason I bring it up here is because it wasn't immediately obvious to me using the interface how you could do this. So I'm just going to show it to you really quick, and I'm going to talk about some other TOC options that you can go explore. The way to do this is to insert a new item, which I just did. Added a new item wherever you want it in your TOC. Give it whatever title you want. And then come and edit the properties of this TOC entry. And in the link box, type the URL or copy the URL where you want this to go, as an example. And this will go to the webmail service, webmail login. You see there's all kinds of other options here that you can do with TOC entries, tons of them. And TOCs are hugely flexible and immensely powerful. And you can go read up for what all these do if you haven't looked into them before. I would really recommend it, but I'm showing this one again because it wasn't totally obvious to me. So you can put in a URL there, and then I like to come down to the Advanced tab and select a new browser frame for this particular entry to open in so that I don't lose the context from where I came from. And so with this entry now in place, when I build this output, this menu in the top nav drop-down item, when somebody clicks it, is going to open up the webmail in a new browser. So this can help expand like this one particular client really helped him so that he could make his Flare output be the central place where people go, where their employees go to get to all the resources they need, even if those resources weren't housed in Flare itself. If I were to click the grid view here, come back to the grid view, you'll see that I can see right here where this link goes to. It's written right there in the grid view. So anyway, so that's some things about TOCs. I hope that there's something that you can grasp from TOC, some little thing that you maybe didn't know before, or something that's going to help you work a little bit more efficiently and a little bit more productively. So the next topic I'd like to touch on is working in topics. So I'm going to open a topic here. And the first thing I want to do is talk about working in the XML editor and the text editor with them side by side or with them stacked. I was working with somebody just earlier this week, and she kept clicking between the XML editor and the text editor like this, which is fine. And I asked her, I said, did you know you can have both of those up at the same time? She said, no, I didn't. How do you do that? I said, well, okay. You have these three little buttons way down here in the corner. And these buttons will allow you to open up your XML editor view and your text editor view side by side or stacked. All you got to do is click the little, the little arrow button, the little caret button to open it up, and then you can kind of size it and drag it. Now everything you do here in your XML editor, you see it updating over here in your code view as well. And you can also work in the code view if you want to and see it updating in your XML editor. And she said, wow, I had no idea that was even possible. I said it's really, really handy to be able to do this, especially if you're not really familiar with how HTML works behind the scenes, because you can work in your XML editor and you can watch the HTML over here being built, and it can really give you a better understanding of how HTML works. And as a Flare author, when you get a better understanding, a more complete understanding of how HTML works, it vastly expands the capabilities of what you're able to deliver, combined with an understanding of CSS. The other thing that I really, really like using over here in the code view is looking for inline styles that need to be removed. So the inline styles, I don't see any in here. Oh, here's one right here, this word replace, which is red. Things like style sheet classes and inline styles show up in a different color if you have the right thing selected. I'll go through that in just a minute. And so it's very easy to scroll through this code and just look at the stuff that's red and blue and say, okay, is it a style class that's going back to the style sheet? And if so, great. If not, like this right here, then do I need to go correct it? Which in this case, I definitely would. I would go create a span style in my style sheet, and I would give this a style class rather than just using this inline style right here. So for me, that's a lot easier, even if I'm not necessarily working in the code, just when I open a topic to be able to quickly kind of scan through it and see if I see any code that looks suspicious or that needs to be fixed or inline styles or those sorts of things can be really, really useful. I have all of the options turned on. Sometimes I work with people and they're all off, and it looks like this. And this view for me isn't quite as useful. Maybe for you it is, and this is what you like. For me, it isn't. I like to turn on line numbers. I don't know why, really. I don't use them all that often, especially in an HTML file, but I just always have them on, so I'm more comfortable with them on. I really like to turn on word wrap so that I don't have to left and right scroll. And I really, really like the show syntax colors. It really helps things stand out. I don't use the show outline quite as much, but with that selected, you can collapse sections of the code if you want to kind of collapse those down and get them out of the way. Sometimes that's useful if you have a long topic, tables in it or something, you want to collapse it so you're not seeing that in the code. Sometimes that can be useful. This last option here is the toggle autocomplete. Unless you're going to work in the code itself, it doesn't really matter if this is on or off. But if you get to the point where you like working in the code and you're comfortable working in the code, the toggle autocomplete can speed things up quite a bit. So for example, if I come in here and want to put in a div, let me turn that, make sure that's on. Give me just a second here. If I want to put in a div, for example, I start typing and this little box comes up and it selects div for me, and I press enter and it puts in the rest of the div tag. And maybe I want a paragraph inside of here. It completes the paragraph tag for me. And so if you get to the point where you're comfortable working in the code, then having that toggle autocomplete can really save some time when you're putting HTML tags in. And you can see now, I just put this in using the code and it shows up. Here's my div tag, here's my paragraph tag, here's my content, the same thing that I see over here. I also really like that you can select text over here and it highlights it in the code view, and vice versa. You can highlight something in the code view and see where it is in your XML editor. So I would really suggest that you get used to working with these side by side. The more you do it, the more you're going to understand how these Flare topics are working behind the scenes, what's really going on in the HTML. You're going to be able to see things that you need to go clean up stylistically, and it's going to give you a deeper understanding and as a result, greater capability in being able to work with Flare topics in the future. Now, one of the most powerful features of Flare is its single sourcing capability. And I'm going to look at a topic that has conditions in here. If you're not familiar with conditions, what conditions are is conditions give you the ability to allow or restrict certain content from given outputs. So for example, in this file you'll see we have content for audience A and content for audience B. And I have an audience A target and an audience B target. And using these conditions, which you can see is indicated by these red and green bars, allows me to deliver content for audience A that audience B won't see, and vice versa. Now, I have the show conditional indicators turned on right now, which is what's making these green bars and these red bars that you see here. Sometimes this is off. And people don't know that it's there. And you can see when I turn that off, it just became a lot more difficult to see what content is conditioned. I see this green box here, I see this red box here, and I see some green and red over here in the block tags, like this paragraph's green, this one's red, we have another green and red down here. But in the topic itself, there's very little that indicates what content is conditioned. So turning on conditional indicators with this little button down here at the bottom can make that stand out a lot more and can be very useful when you're working with highly conditionalized files and need to be able to see what condition is conditioned and what isn't. I have this on by default. I always have it on. I only turn it off if I really need to. Now, and the conditions where I really need to are, I don't know what they are. So I can't think of an example when I would actually turn it off. Now, this topic is somewhat conditioned. It's not hugely conditioned. I've seen topics that have way more conditions than this, way more, and conditions for 4 different audiences and those types of things. And it, the topic looks like a rainbow, just colors all over the place. And it can be hard when you're working with heavily conditioned content to get a grasp or to get a view of what content is going to go with each target, what's going to happen. So what MadCap has done, what Flare has, is this awesome little conditional expression viewer. And I open that by clicking this little button right here, second to the left. And this allows me, in my XML editor view, to specify what content I see in the XML editor. This has nothing to do with output. I'm not setting what is going to be delivered in output in this dialog at all. I'm only changing what I'm seeing currently in my XML editor view. So let's say I'm writing right now for audience A, or I want to see what audience A is going to see. I can exclude the audience B content and click OK, and now in my XML editor, all I see is the audience A content. A lot easier for me to go through and say, okay, does this look okay for audience A? Are there anything that I'm missing, or that sort of thing? And I can come do the same thing for audience B. I can flip that around and say, okay, what is audience B going to see? Does that look okay? Do I need to make any changes? If you have a lot of targets or have a lot of conditions, you can set this with this target expressions dropdown. So I don't have a lot of targets in here or a lot of conditions, but you'll see, like, if I click audience A, then it's going to grab whatever conditions I have set currently in that audience A target and copy them over here into the conditional text dialog. And so I can just set it using the target, just from that target drop-down menu. If you're working with highly conditionalized content and you didn't know this was here, this is a life changer. This makes it so much easier working in your editor view to be able to see what each audience is going to get, or maybe you're using conditions for model types or whatever, what's going to be published or print, or what's going to be in your output, without actually having to go build the output for each of those targets to see what is there. So really, really handy. Now, another thing I like to do, I'm going to go turn this off so I get both my images back. Give me just a second here. Whoops. Sometimes for me, images kind of get in the way, especially if I'm dealing with like a numbered list and every image or every step has like a screenshot or something. It's hard for me to really catch the whole flow of the text and of the words and the instructions if it's constantly being broken up by images. So a lot of times, if I'm confident with the images that I have in there, and if I'm working in my editor view and the images just feel like noise, I'll click this little Show Tags drop-down right here, and I'll select Show All Images as Thumbnails. Now, just like the conditional expression viewer, this also has absolutely nothing to do with your output. I did not just change these images to thumbnails in my output. I only changed them to thumbnails here in my editor view, and it kind of gets them out of the way. I see that they're there, I know that they're there, but I don't need the images, in my editor view right now. I'd rather just be able to focus on the text and see the whole flow of the topic and how it's working without being constantly interrupted by these images. A lot of people I work with have really taken to these show all images as thumbnails. Now, one little caveat is if you have little images, like little icons, it's going to expand those. It's going to take all of your images and make them roughly this size. And so, or if you're using an image for a bullet, it'll make those bigger. And so that can sometimes be maybe a little give and take there on whether or not it's useful for you, but most people that I share this with say that it's useful. Now, before we leave this topic, there's one other thing I want to talk about here, and that is these markers. We have here some markers for keywords and some markers for concept entries. If you're using search filters, then you of course have concepts all over the place in your files, and if you look at this one and this one, I can't see all of the content of this marker. I can't see it in the marker. If I wanted to see it, I'd have to go over into the code and look for it and see what it says. But you have the option to adjust the width of these markers. Again, that's here in the Show Tags drop-down. You can come down to marker width, and you can set this to something like, 500 pixels, and make those much bigger so that you can actually see, all of the content that are in these markers. It's not always going to take up 500 pixels. It'll take up a maximum of 500 pixels. That's what I just set it to. But it'll only take the width that it needs. And so now it's much easier for me to see what's in these blocks without having to click into them or go into the concepts viewer or that type of thing. And so you can expand the width of those markers to make it a lot easier for you to see what's there. Okay, continuing on with our discussion of topics, I want to talk about a particular single sourcing feature that to me seems to be underutilized, maybe, and that is with snippet conditions. So in Flare, what a snippet is, if you're not familiar with snippets, a snippet is a piece of text, some piece of content that you reuse in multiple places in your project. So maybe it's a paragraph, maybe it's a warning box or something like that, some sort of call-out box, maybe it's a table that you're going to reuse in multiple topics. And you create a snippet so that you only have to author the content once and maintain it in one place. You don't have to deal with it in multiple places. Now, you can put conditions in snippets. And using snippet conditions, you can set the conditional properties, like whether a condition is included or excluded, at the file level rather than at the topic level. Now, why or when would you want to do this? This is useful if you need to include common content in two topics in the same TOC, but the content needs to be slightly different. So I've mocked one up here where we have a Model 1 and a Model 2. And most of the content is common, but there's some specific stuff that's for Model 1 and some that's for Model 2. A real-life example of this is when I was working with a client and they were developing an SDK guide for mobile apps. And they had iOS information in there and Android information in there. Conceptually, the iOS and the concept information for iOS and Android was pretty much identical, but of course the procedural information on how you actually develop the app and work with their SDK varied drastically. And they wanted one SDK guide because all their developers were doing both iOS and Android, so they wanted one guide, not two, which means we needed one TOC. But they needed these slight variations between Android and iOS. And so what we did is we created snippets with all the common content in there, and then the little variations between iOS and Android, we tagged them iOS and Android, just like you see here. Imagine this is iOS and Android. With this snippet in place, I can now come insert it into topics. So I have a Model 1 specification, and I'm going to drag my snippet into it. And I have a Model 2 specification, and I'm going to drag my snippet into it. At this point, you'll see this snippet is including everything, Model 1 and Model 2. What I can now do is come into the File Properties, and in this Snippet Conditions tab, I can select my Model Condition tag set, and what is this one, Model 2? I can say I want to exclude Model 1 content, and you'll see all the Model 1 content is now gone. It's showing just Model 2. And of course, for Model 1, I would do just the opposite. I want to exclude Model 2 content in this one. And so now I've inserted the snippet. I can take both of these topics. I can put them into the same TOC, and the output is going to be slightly different because of the snippet conditions that I was able to use. So this is a way where you can set conditional statements at the file level rather than just at the target level. And if this is something you've needed, this will be like, a revelation. If this is something that you haven't needed in your project, then you may be scratching your head wondering, when would I ever use this? I have found that people who really need it get it really quickly. They understand what this does, and they're on cloud 9 that it's there. And people who don't really need it, they don't really grasp it. But just know, if this isn't for you right now, that you can set conditions at the file level. You can just tuck that away, and then you can come back and revisit it when the situations arises that you need to go ahead and do that. Okay, one last thing with regard to working in topics, and that is using Unbind. I love the Unbind feature, and it shows up in, seems like all the places where you really need it. What Unbind does is it removes HTML tags for you. So I've got some examples here in this topic of places where maybe I want to remove some tags that are currently in my HTML, but I don't want to go over here and fiddle with the HTML. So the first one here is this span tag. So I can click this span tag and come up here to my span block. If you don't have blocks up here at the top, some people don't, you can turn them on by clicking this toggle show spans down here at the bottom. Same thing with the ones on the left, by the way. I would always recommend having these on. Anyway, I can highlight that and right click on the span and select Unbind, and it just removed the span tag for me. I showed this at a lightning session at MadWorld last year, and I remember there were 2 or 3 like audible gasps from the audience. Like, this would have saved me so much time. Inline formatting, like right here I've got a italics tag. If I want to get rid of that, I can unbind it. A bulleted list. Let's say for some reason I wanted to turn these 3 bullets into paragraphs. I can unbind the list, and my bullets all just became paragraphs. This div here, if I need to get rid of the div, I can unbind the div, and now the div is gone. This drop-down text, suppose I don't want it to be drop-down text anymore, I just want it to be a heading and a paragraph. I can unbind the drop-down text. Same thing with expanding text. I can unbind the expanding text. Unbind is a vastly useful tool if you need to get in and clean some files up and remove HTML tags that are there that don't need to be there. And so if you found yourself, tinkering in HTML code, or if you're recreating whole files just to get the tagging right, jump in there and see if there's Unbind available to you, and see if you can clean some of that up just using Unbind. You saw how quickly all of these tags that I had in here are now gone. I mean, it just took a few seconds and they're gone. And so have a look in there and see if you can, if that works for you. Okay, so that's what I wanted to talk about with regard to working in topics. Again, I don't expect, like I said at the beginning, that you're going to walk away from this with any sort of deep level knowledge of any individual topic, but I'm hoping that along the way here, as I'm doing these demonstrations, you're able to pick up some things that you can take with you and use as you author in Flare in the future. All right, so let's go look at style sheets now. A few things with regard to style sheets and some really cool stuff for style sheets. So the first thing I want to show is how you can manage font sets in Flare. Font sets are nothing more than a list of fonts. You can open up your font sets dialog box by clicking this Manage Font Sets from within the style sheet editor, and you get your font set manager. What a font set does is it specifies what fonts a given style or property in your style sheet should use. And typically, people will list more than one font. So for example, well, here I'll just create one. I'm going to go create a new font set. And let's say I'm creating a font set for code samples. And I want my code samples to show up in monospace font. But my first choice actually would be to have them show up in this particular monospace font, Consolis. If that happens to not be available, then use Courier. And if Courier isn't available, then just fall back to whatever the default monospace font is on the machine that's being looked at. I set the order for that here. So let's say I want to first use this one, then use this one, and then just fall back to whatever monospace font there is. And I've just created a code samples font set. If you're working with multiple departments in your organization that have different font requirements, or if you're a consultant and you work with multiple clients that have different, font sets that you need to use, or if maybe you use different fonts for internal content as you do for external content, that sort of thing, it can be really useful to come in and create a font set. And once this font set is created, when you go to set a font family on a property or in your style sheet, it's available to you here in the defined font sets area, and you can pin it if you want to. And you can just click that, and it puts in your defined font set for you. So let's say I'm creating a class of a paragraph class called code sample, I can come in here and I can say, okay, for the code sample, I want to make sure this came in by default because I just set the, let me take this off. So now we'll go back here, and on the code sample property, I can choose that, that font family. And let's say I also am going to create a span class of code sample. If I want to do it inline, I can come in here and do the same thing. I can quickly just select the font family. Now I know what I just did will make CSS purists cringe, and I understand that. So let me show you one thing, because I just created two classes, or two code style classes, one on paragraph and one on span. In reality, using a generic class, I could create just one. In fact, I already have it in here. So let me show you how you would do this. What generic classes are, they are styles that you can apply to any tag. So, for example, I just created a p.codesample and a span.codesample. I can't apply span.codesample to anything but a span, or a p.codesample to anything but a paragraph. But if I create a generic class, then I can apply it to any tag that I want to apply it to. Now, you can't create generic classes in Flare from the style sheet editor. To create a generic class, you have to go into the code. So if you're uncomfortable working in the CSS code, then this isn't something for you, although you'll see this really isn't that big of a deal. So what I'm going to do to create this generic class is I'm going to open this style sheet with my internal text editor, and I think I came all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to delete this, just pretend this isn't here. Here's my p.codesample and my span.codesample that I just created. A generic class looks like this, just .codesample, if I can spell. That's what a generic class looks like. And you don't need to do anything else. I'm going to get rid of these two just for the sake of demonstration. That's all you need to do in the code, is just create your generic class and put in your opening and closing indicators there. I'm going to save it, and I can jump out of the code view now. And now when I come up and expand my generic classes section, I have the code sample generic class. And I can come in here and I can set my code sample font family and whatever other properties I need to set. Now with that generic class in place, I can come into a topic and I could say, with from my styles window here, I can click any element. Like I just click this heading 2 and I can select code sample. I can click this paragraph and click code sample. So click code sample. I could take this word and click code sample. And I'm using this generic selector that I can put on any tag that I want. And so using this generic selector for code sample, I wouldn't actually have to create a p.codesample and a span.codesample. I could just create a .codesample and manage it in one place. And so using generic selectors is kind of the next step in your CSS expertise in Flare. There's a lot, the ton we could talk about with CSS. We're not going to get into it, but generic selectors can be very, very useful and can consolidate the places where you have to create styles and can make maintenance of your style sheet down the road quite a bit easier. So if those will work for you, consider giving them a chance. Anytime you go into the code, you do run the risk of messing things up. But again, to create a generic class is quite simple. You just put a period, you give the class a name, and you do your opening and closing. And that's all you need to do in the code. You can save it and then get out of your code view and go back into your editor, and your generic, they're ready for you to, to make modifications to. Okay, I want to talk for just a minute about colors in your style sheet. So anytime you're selecting a color, you can go into this More Colors option here, and this opens up the color picker. A couple neat little things in the color picker that a lot of people that I work with aren't aware of. First is the eyedropper. So you can click this eyedropper and select a screen color. You see it just follows my mouse around. Let's say I want this green. And it automatically puts the hex value and the values I need for that particular color. And I can just find a color really quickly that way. Maybe you can bring up your corporate website on the side and drag it over there and grab that color real quick rather than having to look up the hex value or that kind of thing. So a really quick way to find a color you need. The other thing you can do is you can save colors. With this color selected, I can click Save, and it shows up here in my saved color list. And I can rename this to whatever I want. Now, with that in place, anytime I come back and need to pick a color, I can jump over to this saved list, and there's the color that I just saved. It's right there. Really quick to just jump into that color. If you have corporate colors that you're going to again and again and again, you can save them. And you can come in here and you just click them really quick and move on. Now to delete these colors, if you're done with a saved color, what you do is you click it and you actually press delete on your keyboard. And that'll get rid of a saved color for you. So that can really help you if you're constantly having to go back to colors, or if you've put a little sticky note with the hex values on your desk so that you always know which hex value to type in, or if you've gone to the trouble of memorizing them, now you can just save them and come back to them that way. All right, one last thing I want to talk about with regard to style sheets, an immensely powerful feature, and that is linking style sheets. When you link a style sheet, what you're able to do is you're able to import a style sheet into another style sheet. So for example, I'm going to go create a new style sheet. I'm going to go new style sheet. I'll just call it new. And let's say that on this style sheet, where I want to start with, the starting point for this style sheet is everything that's in main styles. I can come up here, and in my home ribbon, I can select style sheet links, and I can say I want to link this to main styles, and click OK. This new style sheet is now linked to the main styles.css, and if you look at the code view, you'll see, after I save it, let me save it, reopen the code view, it's the very first thing that happens in this style sheet is it imports main styles, and it imports main styles in its entirety. So from here, I can go through and just start making the tweaks that I want to make in this particular style sheet for some given output without having to redo a whole style sheet. Situations where I found that this is most useful is in global project linking scenarios. Let's say you've imported a style sheet from a global project, and let's say we're looking at a child project right here, and let's assume that main styles is a style sheet that's linked back to a global project. But in my child project, I need to do some different stylistic things, not wholesale stylistic differences, but some. Well, what I can do is I could go edit the main styles.css file, but in that case, it breaks the link back to the master project. And so any updates in the master project don't flow down into my child project at that point. So instead, what I could do is create a new style sheet and import my main style sheet. That would leave the link in place back to the master project, so I'm getting style updates from the master, and it allows me the flexibility to make stylistic changes in the child project that I'm working in. Another scenario just recently, well, in the past few months where we used this, I have a client who publishes a huge HTML help site. All of her content goes into this HTML site, and then in addition to that, she publishes dozens of standalone PDF guides. All of the PDF content goes into the HTML site, but the PDF guides are all standalone. A subset of these PDF guides are called setup guides. and a requirement came through from her management that the setup guides needed to have numbered headings. So they needed, 1, 1.1, 1.1.1, 1.1.2, and so on and so forth. And it needed to apply only to the setup guides, not to any of the other PDF guides, and of course not in the HTML output. So I was thinking about this, like, how can we do this? One solution would have been to go into all the setup guide topics and add a class to the headings, like h1.numbered, h2.numbered, that sort of thing. And then in her style sheet, create classes for those in the print output. But that was a fairly invasive and sort of risky solution. We were able to solve this problem using style sheet linking, and I'm going to show you the style sheet that we built for this to solve this problem. So we created a new style sheet called setupguide.css. This style sheet imported her standard style sheet. So everything from the standard style sheet is in the setupguide.css style sheet, all of it, 100% of it. And then all we did was added these MC auto number format properties to the setup guide style sheet, and then assigned the setupguide.css to those PDF targets that needed to have numbered headings. Now when she builds those PDF targets, the headings get numbered. We didn't have to make any changes to the topics. We didn't have to make any changes to her existing style sheet. So using this style sheet linking and style sheet importing can be vastly, vastly powerful and can save you a ton of time. One caveat I want to mention is that if you do this and you have a medium selected, let's say non-print, with that medium selected, if you import a style sheet now, it's going to be imported with that medium. If we go look at this now, let's see, you'll see this one, they now have the non-print medium in the import. And in this case, it's going to pull in only non-print content from those style sheets. If that's what you want, that's great. If it isn't, you just got to be careful that you have your medium set to default when you import the style sheets. Now, one other quick thing, if you don't want to import an entire style sheet, you can click this options button and select import styles, the first one, and you can come select a style sheet from which you want to import styles, and you can just choose the styles that you want to import from an existing style sheet. So if the full style sheet linking isn't the solution for you, then maybe this is, and you come in and just select the styles that you want from another style sheet and import them and get started that way. This doesn't link them, right? The link doesn't exist, but it can give you a starting point for a new style sheet to just import some styles from another style sheet. So we talked about TOCs, working in topics, some things with style sheets. I hope that as we went through this, you were able to pick up some things that you're going to be able to use in your day-to-day work to help you be a little bit more efficient in your Flare authoring. So with that, I want to turn some time back over to Jennifer to talk about some training and MadWorld offers.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel. That was amazing. Just a couple quick slides here. For everybody that has registered today, you are eligible to receive $100 off 2 of our focus training classes that are taking place next month. One is all about responsive HTML5, mobile, and EPUB publishing, which is the beginning of February. And then following that, we have a focus class on Flare project management and team authoring. So the outlines are available on our training page, so you can see all the modules that we cover, and you get a nice registration discount when you book those before January 31st. So you can contact sales to take advantage of that. And the next quick slide I wanted to cover, reminder for everybody that MadWorld is going to be happening April 10th through the 12th here in San Diego. We've extended the early bird registration discount to January 31st, so if you haven't registered, you have a little bit more time to do so and save some money. Daniel will be presenting on a variety of topics, as well as some other amazing presenters. So it's a great opportunity for users to come learn about not only tools, but other tool agnostic type sessions as well, industry best practices, and then come meet our senior support staff and R&D team for any project specific questions in our hospitality lounge. So you get a little one-on-one, over-the-shoulder help and consulting on your projects. So I think we've got, if we can keep on for just one more minute, there's just a couple questions I'm hoping we can get to that sort of pertain to what we covered today. One very high-level question, Daniel, is what negative outcomes can occur due to inline styles? And I thought that was appropriate for what we talked about.
Yeah, that is appropriate. Inline styles, the negative, the real drawback for me for inline styles is that it creates a maintenance burden. So for example, let's say that you're using inline styles to emphasize some text. Maybe you're making it red and bold or something. And you go through your whole project, and using inline styles for the text you want to emphasize, you click red and you click bold, and it ends up in 100 places. If for some reason you need to change that, maybe they say, hey, that doesn't need to be red and bold, it needs to be blue and bold, you need to go change it in 100 places. If, however, you would have created a style sheet class, span.emphasis, and given that the property of red and bold, and then in those 100 places used span.emphasis to emphasize all of those things that needed emphasis, then you could change the properties in one place in your style sheet. You could switch it to blue and bold rather than red and bold without having to go to 100 places. I recommend avoiding inline styles at pretty much all costs and pushing as much as you possibly can into your style sheet, because it makes maintenance of your project significantly less burdensome as time goes on. And it also increases consistency. You'll have complete consistency in how your output looks, because it's all going back to the same styles in the style sheet.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. I think we have time for just one more, and lots of great questions have come in, so we'll certainly be following up with everybody. But one last question that pertains to the font set management we were covering. The question is, where are the font set and saved colors stored in the Flare project?
They're not stored in the Flare project. They're stored in the registry. And what that means is that those font sets and saved colors are going to be available. They're going to be there for every single Flare project you work in. They are not project specific. They're set for Flare globally, and they're saved in the registry. So if you need to remove a font set, I don't think we talked about that. You go into the same font set dialog, and there's a little red X down in the bottom right. You would click that to remove a font set, and then I showed you how to remove a color by clicking the color and deleting it.
And if they're available in the project like that, hopefully I have this correct, would they be available to all users who have access to that project?
No, because they're not stored in the project. They're stored in the registry. And so every user who is on that project would need to go in and create those same colors and font sets in their Flare settings.
Okay. So apologies to anybody on the list if I answered that incorrectly. I think I didn't do a detailed job on that one. Okay, well, we're a little bit over here, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But for all of you that have joined, thank you so much for attending and for asking all your great questions. We'll be compiling a Q&A document and sending it to everybody who registered, along with a link to the recording to view this later on. So again, thanks everybody, and thank you, Daniel, so much, and hope you all have a good rest of the week.
Thank you.